Hello, everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel, where we cover the entire history of the Asia-Pacific War from 1937 all the way up to 1945 and all the major events that led up to it. Joined here yet again by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey, Craig, wonderful to be back for another move forward in the timeline compared to the previous episode.
Yeah, we are back in North Africa. We're getting to almost the end of it. And as we had last seen was Operation Torch. So the Americans have now entered the fray. And basically, they're going to be performing a giant pincer on the remaining German and Italian forces. And I think, other than one battle that will be covered in this episode, almost nobody talks about this part of the campaign. This is the Tunisian campaign, this part, and it really does get glossed over. I mean, any books I kind of read on the subject kind of just maybe uses like one paragraph about it, and that's it. Yeah.
I think that's also what I've also read as well, because I've had several books that I've recently gone through, and the amount of detail they might put in the North African campaign up till the Second Battle of El Alamein and Torch is quite intense, especially in the year 1942.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, oh yeah, this battle happens, and after a while, the Axis surrenders, everyone moves on.
Yeah. But before we jump into it, I just want to bring up the fact that I have a brand new YouTube membership. It's identical to my Patreon account, which can be found at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. If you join either, you get access to the exclusive podcast. It's about 25 plus episodes ongoing at this point. You get early access to all the content I make, and you get voting rights for the subjects I'll tackle next. And by the time this comes out, I don't know if it'll correspond with that month, but this month, the exclusive podcast was actually me explaining the Century of Humiliation. That's the history of China, 1839 to about 1949, and how it created the People's Republic of China we see today. So it's a lot of geopolitics with Xi Jinping, a lot of the speeches he's done lately, and even some Cold War era China history. It's very different from the content I've made in the past. So if that's of interest to you, please go over to either. I would acknowledge that if you decide to join the YouTube membership, you actually get a bit of a bonus. I have a lot of unlisted episodes that never saw the light of day. So I think there's about maybe 5 or 10 of them. So you can go over there and check them out. They're kind of cringy and politically incorrect, but it's bonus content. And yeah. Stating all of that, let's just jump right into it. To kind of just catch up a bit, Operation Torch saw, major Allied victories at Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. And now the Allies have a strong toehold in North Africa. The Axis are now facing basically two pairs of pincers in the form of, Montgomery. And it's not exactly under the control of Patton, but soon to be Patton's forces, we'll call it, but the Americans. And, by hook or crook, the Allies have managed to negotiate a deal with the various French forces involved. It's not just the Vichy French forces. There's actually a lot of different groups. But Admiral François Dalenne is on board. And he's, quote, in charge. I'm doing those bunny quotes right now. He's not very respected by a lot of the French commanders because they see him as, a traitor to France. But he's in charge loosely over the French forces. And now we've kind of got a Anglo-American Franco force that's going to try and just rid Tunisia of the German and Italian menace. And that's where we're coming to right now. Did you want to say anything before we started this, by the way?
Well, I think what we're definitely going to be seeing in this episode, and I'll bring this up a bit later when we talk about the broader strategic situation of the war. This is the start of the downward momentum for the Axis forces. And I think you might also concur with this, not only in the European theater of operations, but even in the Pacific. I mean,
Yeah.
with the exception of probably Operation Ichigo in Japan that they launched in 1944, you really see none of the Axis armies in any situation are really advancing. They're kind of reacting and then trying to attack, but they've lost the initiative. I think it's only the in the European theater, it's only in the Battle of the Atlantic for another few months that the U-boats will be on the offense before they are they are in full retreat.
Yeah, so for my Pacific War fans, as we see, it's starting in 19 well, yeah, starting in 1943. Basically the Japanese they lose. Well, it was after the Guadalcanal campaign, but they lost the initiative and they had to go on the defensive. So the Americans were basically choosing where they were going to fight and such. And as for the German and Italian forces, yeah, this is the point in which they basically are going to go in the defensive. But I'm going to leave some of the aspects of what's going on in Europe for you later. But yeah, the walls are closing in on the Axis globally. And I mean, it's kind of obvious to all the resource capabilities of the Allies. I mean, they have more manpower, they have a lot more production, they've got a lot more territory globally. It was a
And
no-brainer.
I think one more thing we should not overlook is the cooperation and standardization that they put into their military machine. For
Yep.
example, like the famous Liberty ships that
Yeah.
was supplying the American and British forces, that was manufactured en masse in the US. I think 2,000 plus ships of this class,
Oh yeah.
2,700 by the time the war finished. But it was a British design. And they just went to US shipyards to get them to help. And you
Yeah.
talk about each ship carrying 10,000 tons of supplies. And if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the parts that even like a Churchill and the Grants, the Stewarts, uh, the other tanks, right, that the British and Americans will use, right? Because I know they're just going to switch to Shermans later, pretty much.
Yeah, they universalized
They,
everything.
yeah, but this is actually like why they could even maintain that scale of production.
Yep.
And as we've discussed multiple times, they had men who were trained to repair and recover these vehicles as and so it's like, a lot of the tanks that the Allies will be losing in this campaign will be back in action.
I don't think we've ever mentioned this, but if you look at it from a training point of view, imagine the difference between an American tank repairing guy versus a German. The American is working with less parts. He's working with less differentiation of models. A lot of the things are not to say they're rudimentary, but it's a lot easier to repair the tank. You need to know less. Whereas a German, someone who's trained in Germany to repair tanks, can you imagine the amount of specialization for all these different models, all
Oh,
these different parts? It would be
especially
ridiculous.
when you have the tiger and the leopard
Oh
coming
my God.
in like
Yeah.
later this.
Yeah.
I think I do want to call out one thing. It is also due to the industrialization that these countries had post pre-World War II as well. Like the
Mhm.
number of cars and that were then Britain
Yeah.
was, and especially US, you already had a pool of drivers actually.
I've never thought
And
about that. That's true. Yeah.
and they already understand some basics of the parts. And this is something that really stuck with me. It was, I think, The War in the West, Volume 1
Hmm.
by James Holland.
Hmm.
So this is just like at the time World War II is declared, and there's this guy, a British officer, he's anyways called up to his regiment. I think like he was part of the the reserve force and called up, but he was in Germany and was detained.
Yeah.
So I think so. What actually happens is I think after some things, because this is still very early days in the war, right? So it's just Poland right now is the theater of operations.
Hmm.
He's let go, and
Surprising.
so he's taken to the Swiss border. He is given just his passport back, but his clothes and everything, except for the ones he's wearing, all his personal belongings stay in Germany. But the most surprising aspect, they give the car back to him,
They
his car.
gave the car back to him.
Yeah, like his own car that he had.
Okay.
And then he was quite surprised and he asks why. And the German officer said, we don't have the spares for this.
That's
It's
true.
quite it's quite a ominous statement when we really look at it in the grand scheme. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it also just shows the disparity that Germany really was fighting, right? We think of the German armored columns as like the super force, right? But people really need to remember that the Battle of France, for example, the French and British had more tanks
Of
than all
course.
of Germany.
Germany had some of the greatest tanks of World War II, and they were made with, by very good craftsmanship, but they were unbelievable. It took so long to make them. You had to be specialized. Like the same guy would be making almost all the different parts for the tank. It completely goes against everything we know about like the Ford model, what the United States had built. And for production, like, it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense at all, especially for a country with limited resources. They had not limited manpower, I mean, because they did have a slave labor force, mind you. But if you have something that's so difficult to build, you can't just take prisoners and make them, build it for you and stuff. Everything was against Germany in World War II. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just that statement really caught me on guard because then this guy, that officer, he gets to meet the ambassador in Switzerland, and he just casually just gives him all the coupons he needs to buy petrol because he's like, yeah, you just go drive back from, Switzerland, France, take the ferry to England, and go and report to your regiment because you've been called up.
Yeah. Jeez. That's an
And
interesting
just
story.
and it's just like, just just gives it like it's second nature.
Hmm. Well, we'll get back on track. That was a nice side detour, but to jump in after Operation Torch, obviously upon discovering the Darlene deal, Adolf Hitler is not happy. So he orders an occupation of Corsica and the rest of Vichy France on November the 11th. It's not bloodless, but it's not terrible. They're not mass killing people, mind you. The Vichy French offer no resistance. They were well prepared for this because everyone kind of knew the day was coming at some point, and the Axis forces managed to occupy almost all the territory, except for the fleet at Toulon. Now, the Germans do something that I've always found very puzzling. Hitler was terrified that they were going to, scuttle. Well, not scuttle. He was terrified that the ships would get out of Toulon and get over to the Allies into their hands. The plan B is if it gets scuttled, it gets scuttled. No one gets it. But he really wanted to try and get his hands on a lot of the nice ships, let's say like the cruisers and such. And he kind of tells his men to perform a siege of Toulon. So they just surround it for quite a long time. In the meantime, his military commanders they come up with a
Sorry, I
plan.
was just remembering the siege of Toulon and the French Revolutionary Wars
Yeah,
because
of course.
at the end there was a scuttling of the fleet there again.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
they form a plan. It's titled Operation Lila, and it doesn't work out, mind you. But the idea behind it was some, I guess you call them special forces. We're going to try and storm the port to try and take the ships before they're scuttled. Of course, they've given the French like almost a few weeks time. This is going to happen in November the 27th. The French have been preparing all the demolition charges and everything in the meantime, and they're just waiting for the Germans to, try and kick down the doors. There was negotiations in the meantime, but nothing actually came to fruition. The French, they end up when the attack happens, they destroy about 77 vessels, including 3 battleships, 7 cruisers, 15 destroyers, 13 torpedo boats, 6 sloops, 12 submarines, 9 patrol boats, 19 auxiliary ships, 1 school ship, 28 tugs, 4 cranes, and about 39 smaller ships were captured. Most of them had already been sabotaged, so not much use there. Some of
Yeah,
the yeah,
I think they got like a couple of destroyers and submarines only.
yeah, exactly. And some of the major ships, they were on fire for a long time. The oil like was spilled all over the harbor, like it was badly damaged. And I didn't have it in my notes, but I think some ships did manage to get to the Allies. But you're not going to get a big ship out because if like let's say if they wanted one of the battleships to move, if that thing even moved an inch, the Germans are going to storm the place. So it was kind of like a Mexican
Uh,
standoff.
yeah, I think, but it does really reinforce one thing that the British were really terrified of Darlan's Vichy French regime, like just handing over the ships,
Of
even though
course, yeah.
Darlan, yeah, which was an understandable concern.
Oh yeah.
But to Darlan's credit, I'll just give it that man ensured that nothing more than a few destroyers ever went into German hands.
I would give Darlan more credit. The thing is, he's learning after the fact of what happened at the beginning of the war when the
Hmm.
idiot French admirals did what they did. And he understood the real dangers of that. So he was more willing to scuttle the ships because, the fear is that he'd be unwilling. I mean, of course, this setback, France's Navy was set back for a long time from World War II, and they deserved all of that. I'm sorry, they really deserve that. But, in the hands of the Kriegsmarine, yeah, those ships, especially battleships, who knows what the Germans, like, who knows what Donitz would have done with it? If Donitz had a bigger force, maybe he would have been willing to go after the British a bit more. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. That big what if is mostly maybe not in the Atlantic, but
No, no, they couldn't
definitely would
contest that.
have, but definitely would have altered the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Like the
Yeah.
Mediterranean fleet would have position would have been untenable.
Yeah, can you imagine if the Italian Navy was augmented with the Vichy, even if it was under the Vichy French control? If they had just played game, played ball a little bit, they could have really hindered British operations in the Mediterranean. I mean,
It
and
really would have been too untenable. I don't think so. Especially like if you even consider the fact that if the Luftwaffe Fliegerkorps does come in,
yeah,
like I don't think Malta could have survived that.
yeah, no, it could. That's an alternate history right there.
True enough.
Yeah.
True enough.
So, meanwhile, back in Tunisia, French officials are really uncertain as to who they're supposed to support, and their airfields were left open to both sides, in the meantime. So basically, they were just fence sitting, as we say. This allowed the Axis to begin airlifting a lot of forces over at the last minute. So they end up moving about 15,000 soldiers, nearly 600 tons of supplies, followed up by regular ship transports of almost 200 more tanks, 130 artillery pieces, plus 1,000 vehicles of various types, and 13,000 tons of supplies. Because the Axis do not want to give up Tunisia, even though, from my point of view, it's definitely a lost cause. By the end of the month, three German divisions, including the 10th Panzer Division, led by Major General Wolfgang Fischer, and two Italian infantry divisions have arrived. On November the 12th, Walther Neuving was appointed the new commander, 15th Corps, and he's going to arrive on the 17th. Also, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Commander in Chief of the South, he's appointing, as I said, Neuring to command the new German 90th Corps, with orders to establish a beachhead in Tunisia and to press as far west as possible so that they can gain, some breathing space. Upon landing in French North Africa, the British First Army, formed under Lieutenant General Sir Kenneth Anderson, is consisting of the British 5th and 9th Corps, the US 2nd Corps, and the French 19th Corps, which I'm going to be blunt, it's not a corps. It's a mishmash of units, but yeah. Uh, it was I don't even know how to even explain this. An incredibly bad group. Like, it's such a bad situation structurally. They had terrible command structure, terrible communications between the different commands, and I guess the only way to simplify it is the French refused to work with the British, so the French would listen to commands by the Americans, who might not be in charge of whatever given operation, and sometimes they wouldn't even listen to that. They would just be autonomous, and where their loyalty lied, we don't know because there's various different French factions involved in this. But
It's just like wow, how did they not see this coming?
oh God, because the greatest hope, from someone like Sir Winston Churchill, this is additional manpower, and I guess he was kind of like, maybe he was a little bit ignorant to how the French would react in this part of the world because he's looking at his exiled French forces, that are currently in Britain, and they're fighting admirably and everything. But you don't know what you're getting when you go to French North Africa. A
Uh,
lot of these guys,
Just just commenting on the fact of Winston Churchill in this aspect, he's looking at the pre-Excel equivalent of an Excel, saying, okay, this division or army has 500,000 men or whatever,
yeah,
even though this is including like people in support roles
of
or
course.
training. But so your effective fighting force might be 150,000, and the commanders ask for reinforcements. Churchill would be like, "What the hell?" And
Not to
that's
mention the
pretty much,
equipment.
yeah, that's pretty much what got Auckland like sacked in the first place.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, none of these French forces are equipped well. They, they they're just using what they got on hand. And anyways, it's you're gonna find out what happens. But I remember doing the research when I wrote the original script for the YouTube version of this, which is over at Kings and General's Patreon, and I guess the YouTube membership as well. And it took me forever to find decent information on the French units. I finally found it through a specific website that deals with the French armed forces and where they were positioned in the world any given year. So, from what I found, Lieutenant General Louis Coltz, he formed a covering detachment to defend a forward line consisting of key points in Tunisia. In the north was the Tunisian division under General Georges Patton, and in the southwest was the Constantine division under General Joseph Edouard Redefeld. Very weird name for a French guy. There was a boundary between these zones, and an action ran along the road from Soucaras to Le Caf. None of the French units had any modern weaponry or equipment, and they were all below strength, as Garov has already mentioned. Whatever number it says their unit is doesn't mean jack shit. A lot of these guys are just fighting with small arms. So on the other side of this, noting he established his beachheads at Tunis and Bizerte, and he ordered both to begin expanding westwards. By mid-November, he's got about 15,000 Germans, 9,000 Italians, and they're manning the two beachheads. And these beachheads are ranging initially from about 5 to 10 miles from Bizerte to Tunis. He has patrols first extend the perimeters, and he leaves temporary command to Colonel Harlinghausen at Tunis and the other under Lieutenant Colonel Stotz at Bizerte. Now, by the 9th of November, a race has now emerged between the Allies who are trying to, advance before these beachheads get any bigger, and, the Axis on the other side are trying to reinforce the beachheads. The disembarkation at Algiers of the mobile forces only commenced on the 12th of November. Thus, the Allies only had basically 2 infantry brigades to work with at the offset, and this is the British 78th Battle Axe Division, which was an armored regiment, and the British 6th Armored Division, known as the Blade Force during this. So they're kind of the advanced troops that are going to go as fast as they can east. They quickly seized the ports of Bougie, Philippeville, Bonn, and the airfield at Djeli. I think that's how it's pronounced. On the 15th, Anderson divided his forces into 3 columns to invade Tunisia. In the north, the 36th Brigade, supported by the Hart Force, advanced towards Bizerte. In the center was the Blade Force, and further south of them was the 11th Brigade, and they're both going to advance against Tunis. On the 16th, the Allies penetrated the Tunisian border, and they were fighting just minor skirmishes at this point, but they were severely beaten by Luftwaffe attacks. So the Germans' air power at this point is actually still quite strong because they haven't really pulled their forces out of the area, per se. And whenever you're enacting a beachhead perimeter, even for the Allies, their air power isn't going to be as strong as the guys who've been there for quite a long time at this point. So, meanwhile, the Germans gave the Tunisia division an ultimatum, and remember that was a French division. So, from the Allies and the Axis point of view, they don't really know what these French forces in the middle are going to do. So they're both kind of playing footsie with them to see if they'll come to their side or remain neutral. So on the 19th, these Germans, they pull up to where these guys are positioned and they give them an ultimatum basically to just step down and go away and, allow them free passage over this key bridge at Medjez El Bab. That night, unfortunately for the French, the Blade Force, some of the elements of the Blade Force, they reached the area and they found the French. So they started to, donate them some weapons and some mobile trucks and such. And German scouts are watching this. So from the German point of view, okay, they've just joined the Allies. The next day, the Germans.
That's a fair assumption.
Exactly. So the Germans basically are like, okay, no, we're just going to attack them. So the next day, about 9:15, the Germans completely overwhelmed the French position and they capture Medjez El Dab. And I mean, the elements of the Blade Force, it was insignificant. They didn't even really help fight or anything. Meanwhile, back with the Allied columns that were now launching their assault, it's the 24th of November. The 11th Brigade was halted at Medjez El Dab by the German forces now occupying it, while the 36th Division was ambushed and held back at Jifna, suffering nearly 150 casualties. In the center, the Blade Force, who's trying to strike within kind of this narrow pass. I forget what the name of it is actually, but they're going on these old rural country roads, and they find themselves getting into a gap between the 2 infantry brigades towards Sidi Nazir, and they make a flanking attack at Torboba and Dudziba. The northern attack was canceled because of torrential rain, but within the south, the 11th Brigade was stopped by the defenders near Medjebs. The Blade Force passed through Sidi Nazir and they reached the Chogui Pass north of Terborba. The then Company C, the 1st Battalion, 1st Armored Regiment, the United States 1st Armored Division, led by Major Rudolph Barlow, with about 17 M3 Stuart light tanks supported by armored cars of the Derbyshire Yeomanry, and about, sorry, they infiltrate between Axis lines at the airbase at Dujdiba in the afternoon. The Allied tanks destroyed more than 20 Axis aircraft that were on the ground. They shot up all the buildings, they destroyed some supply dumps, and they caused severe casualties. Lacking any infantry support, however, they had to pull out pretty quickly. This really surprised the Germans. They didn't see this coming. They really snuck in through a gap that no one was looking at. The Blade Force then passed through Sidi Nazir and they reached the Chogai Pass north of Taborba, part of the B Squadron Stuarts from the Blade Force. Oh my God. I am rereading my own notes. Sorry. But yeah, so they had attacked the airfield and they did a lot of damage, surprising the Germans. The surprise attack prompted Nuding to pull his units back to Dujiba as the 11th Brigade captured Mejez El Dabe and Torboba was taken unopposed. Now, on the 28th, the 11th Brigade, supported by the 1st Armor Regiment and the Blade Force, attacked Dujiba, only to be devastated by anti-tank guns and Mark 6 Tiger tanks, suffering the loss of 19 tanks on their side. And I mean, it goes without saying, the Mark 6 Tiger is a colossal beast at this point, and I don't think the Allies really have any real answer to it other than overwhelming it with anti-tank guns and such. But it's certainly
Well,
whenever you, yeah.
sorry, it's just that this. I remember this meme. The biggest problem for the Tiger tanks was not the Allied capabilities, but distance and its own mechanics.
Yeah, that definitely is true also. Yeah. But back on December the 1st, the recently arrived 10th Panzer Division, supported by Stukas, they launched a really devastating counterattack, nearly breaking through the Allies through their rear as they're performing a fighting withdrawal for over 4 days. The Allies established a new defensive line east of Mejez El Dabe after suffering the loss of 73 tanks, 430 vehicles, 70 artillery pieces, and over 1,000 casualties. So the Allies are getting slapped around pretty heavily. By the 10th of December, the Allies have built a total strength of just over 50,000 British, 70,000 American, and about 7,000 French troops. Now, Allied intelligence, they're estimating the Axis have roughly about 125,000 combat and about 70,000 service troops, mostly Italian, across their line of departure. The
In
Allies,
Rommel's words, not soldiers.
yeah, the Allies planned a new offensive slated for the 22nd. And the main attack would begin without air cover, as the American 18th Regimental Combat Team and the 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards would advance over the lower ridges of Longstop Hill. 2 days later, the 10th Panzer Division, they counterattack, seeing about 3 days of back and forth fighting. And through this, the Axis won the battle for the high ground, forcing the Allies to withdraw again on the 26th after suffering just over 500 casualties. So, seeing that things aren't working out, the Allies are going to do a bit of a reorganization. The run for Tunisia, as it was called, failed. It was a disaster, to be honest. On December the 24th, Darlan was then assassinated by a French resistance member named Fernand Bonnier de la Chapelle. And I guess a little bit of a background on this character. He was a anti-Vichy France kind of guy. He was also a monarchist. He shot Darlan with an old Ruby 7.65 pistol at the Summer Palace. He was the son of a French journalist who was part of the pro-monarchist group that wanted to restore the pretender to the French throne, the Count of Paris. De la Chapelle was arrested immediately, tried and convicted the next day, and he was executed by a firing squad on December the 26th.
Oh, that was quick.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, if you go back to the French Revolution, summary justice was quite quick.
Yeah. So Darnay is gone. He didn't last very long time in his role as being kind of the puppet. So he is going to be replaced with General Henri Girard, to the bitterness, of course, of General Charles de Gaulle, who refused to collaborate with him because, he's a sissy and he's going to make a little kindergarten hissy fit over it. And that'll go on for some time. Likewise,
And
noting. Oh yeah.
I'll just add one thing about our dear friend de Gaulle. He was already like, he's not in a position to really be demanding things, but he's already pissed off with the Americans because, uh, Roosevelt government was quite willing to, like, they recognized Vichy France as like a political entity, and they were willing to deal with Darlan, as we discussed in the previous episode, which is how we had the Darlan deal, which even the British endorsed.
Yep.
And that pissed off not only de Gaulle but other French extremist groups as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amusing that the audacity and demands this guy has when he does absolutely nothing. De
Oh
Gaulle.
yeah. And he, I don't know how the propaganda machine worked for the French, but they raised him up to be like the forefront of all the French resistance and this and that. I'm like, nah, that's not really how it went down. But anyways,
Yeah.
on the other side, Nutting was replaced with Colonel General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim. The 90th Corps became the 5th Panzer Army, consisting of the Division von Bruch, who's going to be defending the Bezout area, the 10th Panzer Division in the center, and the 1st Superga Division in the south. In northern Tunisia, the British First Army was now reinforced with the British 1st, 4th, and 46th Infantry Divisions. To their right flank was the French 19th Corps, and to their south was the American 2nd Corps, consisting of the 1st and 34th Infantry Divisions and the 1st Armored Division. Now, on January the 18th, Arnim unleashed Operation Eilbolt 1, seeing elements of the 10th Panzer and the 334th Divisions try to forestall an Allied threat near Ineffective, seeking to cut off General Erwin Rommel's line of communication. The offensive made little progress against the right wing of the British Fifth Corps at Bouarada, but further south broke French positions around the western and eastern dorsals, advancing southwest to Roba. Again, the French are just not armed to be able to do much more than kind of garrison at this point, so giving them any defensive zones just didn't make sense. I'm sure they gave the French the easiest places to defend, but the French have small arms. I don't think they have any artillery. It doesn't make sense. To stabilize the line, the 36th Brigade went to Roba, and Combat Command B of the 1st Armored Division went to Ozletia. On the 23rd, the Allied 8th Army captured Rommel's main supply base at Tripoli, forcing the Panzerarmee to retreat to the Mareth line in southern Tunisia. Now the Allied position on the eastern dorsal threatened to divide the Axis forces, isolating the Panzerarmee from its supply line in Tunis. On the 30th, Arnim dispatched the 21st Panzer Division to attack the Fayad Pass, overwhelming and dislodging the French 19th Corps there, who didn't have a hope in hell of defending it. The Axis then unleashed operations Unternehmen, Fulsevin, Lingswein, sorry, that was a hard one, by the 10th and the 21st Panzer Division against Sidi Bouzid on Unterheim Morgenluft, whence the 21st Panzer Division would join the 1st Italian Army to attack Gafsa, and the 10th Panzer Division would attack Carillon.
I think I'll just add one thing that maybe we can just talk a little bit more now of the strategic situation
Yeah.
of the entire war, because now we've crossed into January 1943,
Yeah.
and this is quite significant for the Axis powers as a whole. As first of all, in the Pacific theater, we know that the Guadalcanal campaign is now reaching its conclusion
Mm-hmm.
with the US forces firmly in control. So Japan is now completely on the defensive against the
Oh,
American
yeah.
forces. And even the line in Burma has stabilized.
Mm-hmm.
And most probably infuriatingly to Hitler, we also know at around this time, by the 4th of February 1943, we have General Friedrich Paulus and his 8th Army surrender at Stalingrad.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
there is, first of all, that entire campaign is just sucking German resources, men, material, fuel, ammunition, food, etc. The supply lines are overstretched, and now you just had an entire German army surrender.
Oh, yeah.
It's really like the start of the momentum is really going against them. And as you said a bit earlier, why the Axis continue to defend North Africa is beyond May also, considering they have the Soviet juggernaut marshaling, and it could have actually allowed them more time to fortify Sicily and Italy as well. Just a thought, because otherwise, you don't have to send it like an entire panzer division and three more infantry divisions for, as you said, a doomed cause.
Yeah,
And
and it goes
the
against any
the
strategy. Yeah.
and the only benefit that it gave was they did get one victory against the some small victories against the Allied forces, but nothing significant that would have ever changed the course of the campaign, let alone the war.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, strategically it never made sense. Germany, not to always go back to the old plan of, you knock out one side and then you worry about the other, but the just lingering in the Soviet Union the way they were, it didn't make sense unless you have a knockout blow. It was game over as it was. And they were, it was in the Allies' best interest to have the Germans thinly sparse out all of their forces all around in different territories because obviously the Axis don't have as much units and the production value. So, I mean, they're just falling for traps everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, see, the Allies' utilization of the forces was far better, played to the strengths more.
Yeah.
Because one thing at least I can add for the Tunisian campaign, what we've been discussing in the advance, right? That's pretty much coming in from the Torch landing forces
Hmm.
that are advancing towards Tunisia from the west. The
Yeah.
second half of this pincer, as you mentioned, the ultimate goal is a pincer that converges on Tunisia, is the British Eighth Army. And now they are advancing slowly. Why? There are two reasons. One, Montgomery.
Montgomery. Yeah. Yeah.
And the second, as we've discussed quite a few times on this series of North Africa, logistics. It's just insane because now every mile further the British advance west and head towards Tunisia, they are that much further from their main supply line at the Suez Canal, Alexandria, and Cairo. So it's taking a lot of time. And even like I remember Mary Conningham, commanding the Desert Air Force right now. He's getting quite frustrated because he's not getting supplies, so he cannot maintain a strong fighters presence for a long time. So that's also slowing down the Allied advance because they don't want to move beyond the protective air cover.
Yeah. Definitely. Going back to the battle at hand, we're coming up to February the 14th. Four battle groups totaling about 140 German tanks are advancing through Fayed and the Mazilla passes. Under the cover of a sandstorm, Group Rheinmann and Gerhard engaged elements of the CCA, it's Combat Command A, and by 10 a.m., they circled the Jib Lusoda, and they are defended by the Lusoda force at that time, due north of Sidi Bouzid. Meanwhile, groups Schutt and Stekhoff are advancing through the Mazilla Pass, and then they split up. Schutt advances north, virtually annihilating two battalions of the 168th RCT at the Jubeb Kasserine, while Stekhoff advances southwest to attack Sidi Bouzid. By 5 p.m., Stekhoff engaged the CCA 24 kilometers west of Jebel Hamra, and they suffer a loss of about 44 tanks and many artillery pieces. About 1,000 Forged Allied troops were captured, as countless infantry were then abandoned on the high ground at Djibouti Lusada, Djibouti Geret Hadid, and Djibouti Kassaria. I do apologize to the people listening to this. Pronouncing some of the places in Tunisia is very difficult for me, and I'm kind of screwing it up a bit. But during this battle, as it continues, at dawn on the 5th, the Combat Command C, they counterattack Sidi Bouzid, only to find themselves stuck between two groups of 80 Panzer IIIs, 4s, and Tiger 1s. They are absolutely devastated. They suffer the loss of 46 medium tanks, 130 vehicles, and 9 propelled guns before narrowly escaping to Djibouti Hamra. So this is like an unmitigated disaster on the Allied side. Afterwards, Arnhem orders three groups to advance towards Sibitla, where they are harassed by survivors of the CCA and the CCC, who are continuing to do a fighting withdrawal. The next day, the German panzers, with heavy Stuka support, brush aside the fresh CCB and then they enter Svitra. Further south, Operation Morgenluft saw an Italian First Army battle group advance towards Gafsa on the 15th, only to find the town completely abandoned. The Allies had scrambled to establish a new defensive line, now at the Darnia Kasserine Gap, Sabiba, as Rommel occupied Brana and Thalepte. After 4 days of terrible defeats, the American Second Corps had suffered nearly 3,000 casualties, and this is like men missing and such, 103 tanks, 280 vehicles, 18 field guns, and 3 anti-tank guns. It's an unmitigated disaster, particularly for
I'll
the
just,
Americans.
yeah, because people should consider this is their first
Yeah.
real taste of serious opposition. Because Vichy France is, I mean, they make even, I would just go as far as and say this. They make the Italians look like real soldiers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not even fighting for anything. So yeah. But yeah, this is all these. You can consider basically all these American forces green, and they're facing battle-hardened German veterans in with better equipment than them in a lot of the cases.
Uh, I think just, a bit to that supply ish, like we were talking about the material might of the Allies. Just imagine if you had the Africa Corps, like in this battle, suffering the loss of 103 tanks, almost 300 vehicles,
It'd be a
20.
catastrophe. Yeah.
Yeah, and for the Allies, are like, okay, yeah, we'll get it back in the next convoy.
Yeah.
It's pretty much like that is it's a huge contrast of their might. And it's like, one person has a smaller piggy bank and they don't know how to utilize it properly. The others have a far larger piggy bank and they know how to spend their money.
Yep, they do. Psst. Hey, you. You ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. So, basically at this point, the Tunisia position under Axis control, there was actually very little to do because, well, like we were saying, Montgomery, he had just now reached the Mareth line. So on February the 19th, Arnhem is transferring the 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions to Rommel, who receives new orders from Comando Supremo to attack the Kasserine Pass, as well as the Sibibia Pass, so that he can advance towards Thala and Le Kef to try and clear what is like an area called the Dorsal Occidental of basically whatever's there. So it's an American position. It's the First Army's flank, basically.
And if I'm not mistaken, Rommel also now had successfully completed his retreat as well. And his
Yeah.
men did get crucially a few days of rest as well. And I think his intention was to really smash the American troops right now. Because
Well, yeah, because he basically he had time because Montgomery was taking so long, so he had nothing else to do. So he thought, why not try and bash the Americans while I still can, and then come back to the Mareth line to try and make a stand against the British. Yeah.
yeah, and at this point, the Eighth Army is a veteran and experienced fighting force.
Oh yeah.
So they're not going to be pushovers. But and green troops it's quite difficult to have them stand their ground.
Yep.
And I think Rommel knew that. So that's why I guess it's like a golden opportunity for him to, attack the American forces. And then, as you said, swing back to face what he would have probably believed is the main
The real
danger.
threat. Yeah, definitely. That
The
was how
British
he
Eighth
saw it.
Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, actually, I'll dabble into this because I wasn't able to dabble into this for the Kings and Generals version on YouTube because it's simply is too much information for a YouTube episode. But Rommel was the one who had pushed for this. He wanted to directly attack through the Kasserine Pass to hit the main force of the United States Second Corps at Tunisia. He wanted to capture all their supplies, eliminate, their ability to attack, the coastal corridor linking Mareth and Tunis, and he just wanted to threaten the rest of the First Army's flank. So basically, in other words, he wanted to take a sledgehammer to try and just break him at the knees, so that he wouldn't have to worry about this new army to his west, so that he could focus his attention on Montgomery. But it was Comando Supremo who revised his own orders when he had given it to them. And basically, for lack of better words, Rommel had a pretty simplified plan. With a focus point going down a pass, and he didn't want to have multiple targets because he needed to do it really quick. He wanted to hit them hard. In Commando Supremo, basically they overcomplicated it and wanted him to do two different passes at once. It's actually unbelievably stupid when you look at it on a map, and it makes complete sense that he was royally pissed off. And this is kind of like one of the nails in the coffin of him doing anything further in North Africa, because he just couldn't work with Commando Supremo anymore with this,
Well,
kind of did
to
this all the
him,
time.
they're Italians. They're Italian, so
Yeah.
that is something already a negative point for Rommel. And
Yeah.
I think in this case, I'll give it to him. It's better to have a simple plan because it's quicker to execute, easier to explain it to your men as well.
Yeah. And I don't know how many times we've actually even talked about in the series, but it's not the first time. Basically, Rommel, because he's not at the top, he's not the guy making quote unquote the decisions. He makes this advisement. He says, "Here's the plan. This is what I should do," because he's the field commander in all these situations. Commando Supremo gets to say yes or no, and a lot of the time, even though they say yes, they revise his own plans. And if there's anything that's more revile than that, you're the field commander, the terrain, you're looking at it, you're there, and then to have some guy in Rome tell you, what, do this on top of whatever the hell you were saying. It's like it was ridiculous, and of course it pissed him off.
I think that's I would say it's not only like Rommel from this guy, but it's pretty much any army leader from any of the nations that are participating right now.
Yeah, of course.
Be it like Hitler on his generals, Churchill on his generals,
Oh yeah,
FDR.
Yeah, but so yeah, and to be honest, Rommel's already taken a string of defeats, and he's probably very demoralized at this point. But well, he's going to have this one last chamber in the gun, so to say. So early in the 19th, Rommel orders the remnants of the Afrika Korps assault group to attack the Kasserine Pass. And this is going to see the 21st Panzer Division attack through the Sibibia Pass as well, while the group von Roche is going to concentrate at Sibibia to try and exploit any successes in either pass. So if you had a map open, there's basically a very large pass and a slightly smaller pass north of it. And instead of just going through one, Rommel's forced to sprinkle both of his forces to attack both sides. And just a moment, please. Sorry about that. I had a meeting notice all of a sudden. It sprang up on my Zoom, but I do not have a meeting today for my job as I was taking a break right now. Anyways, so defending the Kasserine Pass was the Stark Force, consisting of the 1st Battalion of the US 26 RCT and the US 19 CER, the US 6 Field Artillery Battalion, a Tank Destroyer Battalion, and a battery of French artillery. Along the hills west of them was the Velvet Force, and the blocking the track from Frania towards Tbilisi was the Bowen Force, and between them was the 1st Armored Division. At 6:30 a.m. on the 19th, the 33rd Reconnaissance Unit failed at a surprise attack. Rommel then ordered 2 battalions of the Panzer Grenadier Regiment into the floor of the pass and against Deville-Sumama. By noon, tanks of the 8th Panzer Regiment were committed, but they were making little progress. So Rommel ordered units of the 10th Panzer Division, the Afrika Korps Group, and the 131st Centauro Division to advance for a morning attack. And meanwhile, the British 26th Armored Brigade reinforced Thala as Brigadier Dubfi had dispatched the Gore Force for a forward reconnaissance. During the night, the U.S. positions along the 2 shoulders of the overlooking the pass, they were simply overrun. At 8:30 a.m., German Panzer Grenadiers and Italian Bersaglieri begin in a general attack. By 10 a.m., Dubfi judged that the Stark Force was about to buckle, so he ordered the Gore Force to advance to the Italia side of the pass as the 131st Centauro Division launched their attack towards Tbilisi. Anderson simultaneously dispatched another force called the Nick Force, also to Thala, to take command of all of the Allied troops in the sector, completely confusing the communications in this situation. Dijbel was captured by the 5th Bersaglieri Regiment by the late morning, opening the road to Thala and Tbilisi. By 12 p.m., Axis armor is now pouring through the pass, utterly routing the American forces, becoming one of the worst American defeats during the Tunisian campaign. At 1 p.m., Rommel committed 2 battalions from the 10th Panzer Division, who quickly breached the Allied defenses. Tanks and Bersaglieri stormed Highway 13, completely overrunning the 19th CER. American survivors are now fleeing up the western exit of the pass towards the Jebel Hamra, where CCB was literally just arriving to the scene. At the exit to Thala, the Gore Force was leapfrogging back while losing all of their tanks before linking up with the 26th Armored Brigade. Now, early on the 21st, the DAC group advanced along the Hatab River Valley towards Haida and Tbilisi. They engaged the American 16th Infantry Regiment and the CCB at Jebel El Hamra, finally halting the Axis forces despite heavy Luftwaffe support. The next day, the 5th Bersaglieri, 1 Semavonte self-propelled artillery group, reinforced with tanks of the 15th Panzers, attacked towards Uchepka Pass, and by mid-afternoon, the Allies launched a counterattack, capturing about 400 Axis prisoners before, pressing directly into the Afrika Korps position. Sorry, it's the Afrika Korps group, because this is kind of like the survivors of the Afrika Korps. They're not the same group they once were. Meanwhile, the 10th Panzer Division was en route to Thala, defended by the 26th Armored Brigade and survivors of the 26th Infantry who have dug in onto the ridges. If Thala fell, the American 9th Division in the north would be completely cut off, and the CCB would be trapped, pretty much encircled. The defenders fought fierce, delaying actions in front of Thala, retreating ridge by ridge, heading north by dark. Reinforcements began to arrive from Morocco, bolstering the front line to 84 guns, numerous anti-tank guns, armored cars, Valentine tanks, and Crusader tanks. Anderson then ordered the US 9th Division and their artillery to support an advance to Le Kef to meet an expected Axis attack, but Major General Ernest Harmon, recently dispatched by Eisenhower to report on the battle situation, instructed them to stay in their place. So again, the communications is so bad in this battle. It's actually, by the way, for everyone listening, this is a legendary battle, and it's legendary for all the wrong reasons. On the morning of the 22nd, an intense Allied artillery bombardment repulsed the 10th Panzer Division. Rommel knew the offensive now was kind of like grounding to a halt, but he had done considerable damage, so he decided he was just going to break off the attack, and he concentrated in southern Tunisia to now engage Montgomery, who he saw as kind of the real threat. Despite failing to decisively break through the Allied lines like he wanted to, and given if he had done the original plan, he probably could have managed it, Rommel had inflicted tremendous losses upon the Americans around Gafsa and Sabitla. The Axis had suffered about 200 deaths, 500 wounded or so, 250 missing, 608 men were taken prisoner. They lost 20 tanks, almost 70 vehicles, 14 artillery pieces. For the Americans, they suffered 300 deaths, 3,000 wounded, 3,000 missing. The French suffered another 50 deaths, 200 wounded, 250 missing. And as for captured Allied prisoners, it was over about 4,000. Alongside this, the Americans lost nearly 200 tanks, 104 half-tracked vehicles, more than 200 pieces of artillery, 500 trucks, nearly 60,000 gallons of fuel, and 45 tons of ammunition, much of which was captured by, of course, Rommel.
Well, I'm pretty sure considering his supplies life, I think this would have been the best news he had in months.
Yeah, Rommel by the end of the North Africa campaign is basically just a thief going around trying to steal shit because it's the only way he could supply himself. But after this complete catastrophe at the Kasserine Pass, basically it highlighted to all the Allied commanders they had serious communication and coordination problems because of a terrible Allied chain of command. So both Anderson and Fredendall, they failed to properly coordinate or integrate their forces under their command. Both had dispatched conflicting orders. They butted heads too often. And most egregious was Anderson's decision to disperse the American 1st Armored Division's combat commands. So that was the CCA, CCB, and the CCC. Utterly, anybody who understands tech warfare going all the way back to World War I, you want to mass armor when you use it. It's most effective, as like a sledgehammer, basically. You don't want to disperse it. And he did kind of the most classic thing not to do. As a result,
you mean what the British initially believed armor was? Infantry support.
Exactly. Exactly. So as a result, Eisenhower formed the 18th Armor Group under General Sir Harold Alexander, who Garov, has a bit of a crush on, I'd
say. He should be the best general of Britain in World War II and not Montgomery.
Oh, God, yeah. So it was going to be his job to tighten the operation, certainly control over the 3 Allied nations. I think even the French would agree at this point they'd rather not be under the American command. So numerous commanders were removed or promoted out of the way, such as Major General Lloyd Fredendall, who was relieved by a rising star, General George Patton.
And his famous pistols.
Of course, were saved.
Yeah. But I think I'll just add some things about how big of a fiasco it was. So the battle, right? It started on the 19th of February and went on until about the 24th. So the 18th Army Group that Harold Alexander was given in charge of, that he effectively did take command on 20th. But since the battle's already there, he knows right now's not the best time to get involved with his subordinates. Because he's not going to be, and I think considering the mess of communication, very good idea. But he was quite critical about both Anderson and Fredendall, quite scathing. And I think, and Patton was reportedly told by General Bradley, that time his subordinate, that a lot of the sub-commanders of Fredendall had lost complete confidence in him. And even Harold Alexander's quoted to have said to the American commanders, come on, you gotta have better guys than this.
Yeah. It wasn't a good look. That was for sure.
Yeah, and as you said, a lot of these guys got promoted out of their way so that they just are not involved. And it is actually quite bad in a way for the Allies because General Patton, the reason he's not involved right now is he's been taken out of the front line because he's working with Harold Alexander and others in the planning for the invasion of Sicily.
Yes.
And he's actually removed from the planning job for a while because he needs to take command of the field forces. So I think it's quite they got a bloody nose, but I think the more impressive thing is they made sure they learned their lessons.
Oh no, it was a quick readjustment of numerous commanders, whether it be British, American, and French, and they're going to come back. This is considered the last battle for Rommel in North Africa. He's basically this is going to end his career there for now. I was about to say no. He's going to end his career in North Africa, and I guess it's like one last hurrah for him because Montgomery's going to face that Meredith line, and Montgomery has veteran forces. He's going to be in a much better position than he ever was because he knows on the other side he has allies, doing a pincer attack. And it's kind of just a matter of time before the Axis forces are going to be kicked out of Tunisia. How are they going to get
Yeah.
kicked out? How bad is it going to be? How many of them will be captured is up to how well the Allies can coordinate their efforts. And yeah.
Well, that's exactly why you had the 18th Army Group formed. You just have one commander, and I think that is what was needed. And one more thing I should add is the US now, like how the British saw with the Desert Air Force, the value of close air tactical support.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
the strategic bombing, because that would be a point of contention for years to come, that strategic bombing command had to be separate, but close air support, tactical usage of fighters and fighter bombers, that's now going to become doctrine.
Yeah. And stating all of that, this has actually been a bit of a shorter episode, mind you. I just want to state to my audience again, if you do have the chance and you can spare a little bit, you can support me further with my YouTube membership, or you can go over to my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. If you join either, you get access to my exclusive podcast, you get early access to all the content I make, and you get voting rights for the subjects I'll tackle next. I do recommend if you watch my stuff on YouTube that you join the YouTube membership because I think I will be able to provide just a little bit more over there. There's certainly more bonus content because I have a lot of unlisted episodes or podcasts for that matter. They're sitting there. And I mean, I do upload, I think, first to YouTube because I want to always check for monetization stuff and all that. So maybe it's a bit quicker over there. But, stating all of that, thanks, Gara, for being kind of a hostage in this episode. It's kind of just been me blurting out and improperly pronouncing names in Tunisia. I apologize. I was really bad in this episode, but I'll try to get better at that.
Yeah, but thanks for having me on here. And it's still a great learning experience. And as you said, it's quite a dark area of this entire theater of operations,
Yeah.
especially considering you do have a couple of operations in this area that have been extensively covered by conventional history.
Yeah. And next time we're going to be next time we're talking about North Africa, we'll be finishing off the Tunisian campaign, but we're going to definitely sprinkle in some very, we'll say general history. It's going to be all over the place for a while. We're going to test stuff out, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. I think we are already looking at our pipeline, and I'm trying to figure out what would be the next episode.
Yeah, we'll choose something soon. But till then, thanks, guys.